Welcome. Been a minute, but we're back. Don't worry, I'll explain where I was. It's not that exciting, but we'll explain it. So, it is a little late getting started tonight. I apologize as always. I thought I was going to be able to actually get started a little while ago, but I believe that I need a new cord to go from my camera to my laptop because if I even breathe wrong on it right now, it's causing me to fuzz in and out. So, yeah. We are live again on Facebook and on YouTube. Yeah. So, yeah. What's up, Marvin? We are going to be talking about horsepower tonight. Um, I have seen this comment posted so many times in the last few days. Hey, I just got this car. What can I do to make more power? I'm going to buy a cold air intake and injectors and a header. And what else do I need? And what can I do for free to make more power? I've probably seen some sort of that a dozen times in the last week, which is great because it tells me that there's a lot of people that are getting into the sport that are new. They don't know, they don't know everything that's going on, or they're switching platforms or something like that. So it's yeah. So yes, Jordan says I got some driven oil. So hopefully that nets a couple ponies. We are wearing the driven oil shirt. I thought we'd mix it up a little bit tonight. I found this one, so we're wearing it. If you do want to support us and get, in my regards, the best oil you can put into a race car, head over to drivenracingoil.com. Use code the FWD10, and you save 10% off your order. Orders over $99, ship for free. If you order 12 quarts of oil using the discount with the free shipping, it is the cheapest you can buy driven racing oil on the internet. So, yeah. And what's up, Mark? Trent says, wait, you're alive. I am. So, a little bit of the story, just real quick. I was sick as hell last week. I had some sort of a cold. I had a sore throat like I haven't had in a while. I'm gonna cough a couple times tonight. I can pretty much guarantee it. Um, it's not fun, but I thought I was gonna be able to do a show, so I didn't make a post, and then I'd get out of work and I couldn't talk. So yeah. Face is blending into the white background too much. I'm trying something new tonight. And yeah, I think what I need to do is I need to hang my flags back here and just have my whiteboard. So we might be doing that. I was hoping this would work a little better. I actually have less light than usual. I did some different camera settings tonight. So I apologize if it looks terrible. I do. So change motor in a cabbie. Now it idles low. Any suggestions? Make sure that everything's hooked up properly. It's possible that the IAC isn't moving quite right. So, I do want to talk about one thing real quick while we have a bunch of you guys. Can we all just stop being like angry at the racetrack, to put it gently? I have seen more fights and more intentional wrecks and all of that sort of thing this year than I think I have halfway through the season any previous year. Maybe people are just sharing it more. I don't know. I've seen close to a dozen tracks hand out some sort of penalty, tracks or traveling series hand out some sort of penalty for fighting in the pits, for intentionally trying to wreck somebody. Um, I personally watched a grown man try to take out a 15-year-old girl under caution. I just watched a video of a girl who tried to wipe out another dude under caution in a late model. This year it is bad. It is really bad. Now, I haven't personally raced yet this year. You guys can't tell, but the camera's actually looking over the race car that I'm building here. But I don't know what it is. I don't know what's in the air this year. If you're the type that you're going to go out there and you're going to get so mad on a slight contact with somebody that you're going to have to try to retaliate under caution or try to fist fight somebody in the pits, go fishing for a week. Go put the car in the garage and go do the second best hobby you got for a couple weeks. Okay. This is just me as a racer and me as a race fan. Yeah, fights can be exciting. I get it. But and this isn't just us. This is just the front wheel drives. It is something in racing this year. I don't know what it is. So if you guys know, let me know. But everybody just kind of take a breath, right? I'm not a perfect driver. I'm not a perfect guy. Like I have wrecked myself and blamed somebody else. I blamed the wrong person who's wrecked me. I've been mad. I've wanted to fight people. I haven't yet. I might. I'm not perfect, right? I get it. We're all hot. And if the same dude's wrecks you three weeks in a row, I get that too. But instead of risking his life and risking somebody else's life on the track, maybe go race somewhere else for a week, you know? So, yeah. Yeah. All right, let's get into this. How do you make horsepower? All right. There are three things, basic things, that you need to make horsepower. First of all, is air. The next thing you need is fuel. And the last thing you need, in general, is squish. Squish is your compression, okay? Now, obviously, you've got ignition timing, you got spark, okay? We're going to talk about that and why that's not on the board here in just a second. But you need these three things. Maybe in this order, maybe not in this order. I can tell you that these two should go above that one pretty much every time. If you have 15 to 1 compression, sucking through a drinking straw of a stock head, you're not making the horsepower you think you are. You are way better off having about a 9.5 to 1 compression motor that has a ton of airflow. You'll make more horsepower that way than having a bunch of compression. Okay. Just saying. And that's coming from personal experience. I ran 10.5 to 1 pistons with a decked head, which gave me more compression, but it was stock. And I ran the same short block with a head that wasn't decked. So I lost a point of compression or so, 3/4 of a point, but it had way better airflow, bigger cams. We didn't dyno it, but it made a lot more smoke. It went a lot faster, right? Yes, Brent says, lean her out and crank that timing. Fuel and tire prices and general cost of living seem to have tensions high. Tensions are high. I do understand that. By the way, I found this hilarious. Y'all see Hoosier's post? Hoosier Tire posted, best tire in the business since like 57 or whatever. They getting drugged. They are getting drugged in their own comment section. I'm here for it. Okay. I'm here for that one. There's no reason why the 790 has went from $90 to $150 in 2 years. There's none. Okay. So squish is the last thing you should worry about. Also, squish is pretty much never the cheapest thing. It can kind of be. If you're decking the head, you can deck it farther for a little more compression, but there's a limit to that. You can't go from 9 to 1 to 14 to 1 by decking the head a little bit, okay? So yes, you can get some compression, but not a ton of it, right? Right? Yeah. Hoosier was doing something. They're getting drugged. Man, I'm even drinking the white monster tonight. Everything's just blending. You guys cannot see that at all. Okay. I am going to try to adjust the white balance on the camera for a second. If the signal drops out for just a second, I promise you it will be right back, okay? Because my cable's a little funky, but I am going to try to make this better for you guys real quick. Just a second here. Okay, that's too dark. Huh? I'm not that good of a cameraman, okay? I'm not even going to lie to you guys. Let's try somewhere that's halfway in between. Halfway in between. Hey, you know what? That's not so bad. That's okay. That's not so bad. Is that better, everyone? Everyone agree? Better? Okay. We're going to start off talking about air. Because air, actually, I take that back. You know what we're going to talk about? We're talking about first. Where'd my marker go? Where'd my marker go? What we're going to talk about first, make, my handwriting's not so good either. Make it right. Okay? What do I mean by make it right? Make it run right. Okay? Hands down, that is the freest horsepower you are going to make. Okay? I'm telling you guys and gals, the amount of people that I have had conversations with that start out by saying it's got a misfire in it, or it seems way down on power or something, and then go, how can I make more horsepower? You can make it run right. Okay. Do you need new spark plugs? Do you need a coil pack? Do you need a sensor? Do you need to clean your fuel injectors? Do you need to put a new fuel pump in it? A new fuel filter? Something. If you are not, look, if this is the horsepower you can make, okay, this is your max horsepower, and you're making this much horsepower, right? That's where we're at. If you think it's down on power, make it right. That is the first thing you should do. Okay? Make it right. Do a compression check. Make sure that you're not way off on one cylinder and that's why you're down on power, stuff like that. Okay? Make it run right. Because the amount of people that I have had ask me how to make horsepower while they tell me that their car doesn't run right it's happened more times than I should be able to count. Okay. So now we're gonna talk about air. Right? So if you sit there and you look at your engine, it's gonna pull air in and then it's gonna push air out. And this is a very simple concept. The harder it is to do either one of those things, the less horsepower you're gonna make. We're talking very generally, but that's the truth. Now, the issue with this is that sometimes you might not know what is easier or harder. Okay. Now, if you have your stock intake manifold with a stock throttle body going into some stock air breather deal that comes down here. All right, look, I'm not good at drawing. Okay. And then you've got a small little restrictive air filter and then this tiny little opening where it draws air in. It's probably a restriction through here. Okay. Now, an easy way to go might be just to take the existing pipe that you have and just put you a nice cone filter on it. Okay. Get rid of the restrictive air box. The answer might be a K&N filter in your stock air box. Depends on what your rules allow. Depends on if you're allowed this smooth bore tubing, right? Or if you've got to go to your performance section of Home Depot and get you some dryer ducting so that it looks like that instead. Yeah, sometimes I don't agree with rules either. Right? You might not know if a convoluted tube or a smooth tube, or if you have a tube that comes out here and then it flares bigger into your cone filter, or if you just have a bigger one to begin with, you might not know exactly which one of those is going to make the most horsepower. Okay, that's understandable. But if you have a small opening, like if this wasn't an all filter and it was only opening through here, that's not going to be the best. Okay, the least amount of times that air has to turn and the least amount that air has to go through as far as a restriction. So like your filter, your tubing, okay, typically better. However, if you just smack you a cone filter right here, you're leaving horsepower on the table. I can pretty much guarantee you that. Okay. I've yet to see a dyno from anyone ever. And guys and gals, I look at a lot of like YouTube videos, right? Right. The issue that most people generally agree on is that air, as it gets sucked in here, has to make such a sharp curve, and then it just gets turbulent. Turbulent air, slower through there. So you want to extend the pipe out a little bit. Put your filter out here. Okay. Because it allows that air time to smooth out before it comes into the intake manifold. Almost universally, taking an air filter and slamming it onto the throttle body is not the most horsepower. Now, does that need to be 4 inches or 30 inches, or that you might have to experiment with? Okay. But, you know, you got to use up restrictions. Now, Brent says it here. Okay. And we were going to talk about this a little bit with exhaust, but it does apply to intake. Okay. Too easy on the intake side kills air velocity, which kills power. Make sure you emphasize bigger isn't always better. He's right. That goes for intake and exhaust. Okay. And look, I'm going to tell you guys something about back pressure that some of you you're going to stop watching when I say it in a minute. Okay. If you have your intake manifold, right? And let's say it's an aftermarket one. Oh. Let's say it's one like this, right? That I could pretty much put any size opening that I want in there. Well, the thing is that if I make that opening this big and you have this massive cross section of air, it's just going to flow real lazy. It's just kind of going to come in. It's going to be real lazy. Okay. It won't get any boost from the air around it. The velocity of the air coming in, it's too slow, right? An example of this, so Mississippi River is a really good example of something like this. In spots where it's really, 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 really wide, the water seems to flow really slow because it doesn't have the velocity. But that river necks down in places, and the speed of the water through that area is insanely fast compared to back here. Now, the problem is that if you go too small, becomes a restriction, pressure starts building up back here. Okay? You don't want that. Technically, you would. The issue is on the intake side is that you would actually you wouldn't get pressure built up back here. Is you would not actually the velocity as it comes through here would stall out, and you just wouldn't be able to pull any more through there. Okay. I had to think about that for a second. I won't lie to you guys. I'm running on about 2.5 hours of sleep, so could not fall asleep last night at all. So bigger is not always better. If your car came from the factory, let's say here you got a Dodge Neon. I know Dodge Neons really well, so we're going to use that in this example a lot. Okay, they come from the factory with a 52 or a 49 millimeter throttle body. Depends on if you have an automatic or manual. Okay, if you have a bone stock everything and you go from a 52 millimeter throttle body to a 90 millimeter throttle body, first off, the intake won't support it. But let's say, for example, that it would. Okay, you have no velocity coming through there. You're going to kill power. Now, if you go from a 52 to a 55 or a 58 or a 60, you'd probably be okay. Because it's still small enough that if it drops a little bit of velocity, it does still have the flow, so you're doing okay. Now, the other thing to remember when you think about your throttle body size is that if you have a circle and you have it, look, I'm not a math guy either, okay? Some of you could actually do the math on this one. It's the theory that we're going to talk about for a second here, okay? So if I have two circles, okay, and we're going to just use round numbers. We're going to say that this one is 50 and this one is 55, right? 5 millimeters does not sound like a lot. It isn't a lot, right? However, when you add 55 in a circle, the actual circle or the actual square area here is way bigger, okay? Because as some of you might remember, pi r squared. That's how you determine the inside. So your r gets squared, which increases it insane, okay? So the difference between a 50 and a 55 millimeter throttle body could be like 50% more air. Again, not a numbers guy. If one of you wants to do the math on this one, by all means, okay? Go right ahead, put it in there. I want to be, I'll say it, I'll be correct, okay? But it's a lot. Just a small size difference going from a 50 to a 55, or say a 55 to a 60. 8 millimeter can be huge as far as the actual air going through that size hole, okay? Huge. Huge, right? So bigger is not always better. Now, there are instances where, and this is your advanced level stuff, okay? Let's say that you have your intake piping might come out and have a chamber in it, right? Might get bigger, might get smaller, might taper, so it goes bigger down into smaller, things like that. This could make horsepower, could lose you horsepower. That's something you're either going to have to experiment with or rely on somebody who's already experimented with it, okay? So bigger can mean better, but not always. The air needs to have a laminar flow for making power. Yeah. No GM application makes more power than the Gen 4 87 millimeter throttle body. Gen 3 is 78. The big mouth 102s are just a way to spend money. They sure do look cool, though. How much does higher RPM matter? Like between 65 max and 93 max? A lot. RPM matters a lot. Okay. And turbulence is what chokes power. Turbulence becomes restriction. So, yeah. There is calculations out there on how much airflow you need to make horsepower at RPMs. Okay. If you go from, and we're going to use your example here, 6,500 to 9,300, right? The difference in the amount of times that your piston goes from a empty chamber to a full chamber, drawing air in and then pushing it out, it's a lot. 6,000 to 9,000 is a lot different, right? And the issue with that is that every stroke pull is, in a perfect world, every downstroke on the intake side is going to pull X amount of air in. So if I want to make sure that at 6,000 RPMs I can make peak power, I need to make sure that every part of the system can flow that amount of air to get it down into the cylinder, okay? And then 9,000 is the same deal because I need to be able to have that chamber filled in the same amount of time more times, right? So again, I have X amount of chamber volume. The system needs to be able to flow X amount per second, CFM, cubic feet per minute, right? It needs to be able to flow more of that. And laws of diminishing return, right? The higher you go, you might choke the motor out because it can't feed it there, okay? Now, that's also something to take in mind as we talk about all of this. Some of these modifications are going to make a lot more power on an engine that flows a ton of air at big lift in the cam, but it's only going to make that at high RPMs. At low RPMs, it doesn't have the velocity through the system. It's got that turbulence. It's got all that pressure built up in there, and it's not going to make as much torque, right? It can happen. That's why some of the motors, you'll see the dyno graphs will kind of go like that, right? First off, VTEC, right about there. But this is what's happening with a lot of these graphs is somewhere in this range is when it actually starts hitting its efficiency and it really starts moving air, okay? There is some really advanced stuff. I am not going to explain VE. I'm not going to explain the second order of wave, third order of wave. There's a lot of, I was just about to say, there's a lot of really advanced stuff for making horsepower. We're trying to keep this simple, okay? Trying to keep this simple. Someday we'll do someday again, we'll do another deep dive into horsepower, but we're trying to keep it simple. So where I'm headed with all of this, with the air, is we got to get the air in, okay? So air filter to your throttle body, to your intake manifold, into the head, into the chamber. That's your path, right? If you have a stock cylinder head with a port size that flows, we're going to use round numbers, that flows 100 CFM, okay? If I am flowing 100 CFM and I'm making peak horsepower because my head is maxed out, if I take my valve and I go from opening it stock to opening it with a set of aftermarket cams, I'm not going to make any more horsepower because I can't flow anything past that, okay? The other part of that is that if this will flow, 700 CFM, but my intake manifold that it attaches to, we'll put a chamber here, right? Whatever. Not an artist. I weld stuff. If this will only flow 300, doesn't matter that my head flows 700, right? Your system needs to match. Now, there is room for improvement across everything. Your stock camshafts are probably not maxing out your head. You could put camshafts in the motor. If you go too big, you're going to lose that flow. So a small, medium camshaft with a stock head is an okay way to go if you're allowed to do that with the rules, okay? Intake manifolds. The factory intake manifold, this one's ported, but the factory intake manifolds, I don't have an actual factory intake, so you're going to have to pretend with me for a minute. The factory intake manifold on a Dodge Neon. Put my pen away a second. This is the upper, okay? It has a lower. This one's an aftermarket one. They go together. Why this is an aftermarket lower is this bit right here. The stock Neon has a portion here that 90 degrees it and the throttle body sits straight up. That 90 degrees is the absolute choke point of the intake manifold. You physically cannot enlarge that part big enough to even match a factory throttle body. So if I go big, massive throttle body, it won't matter because just short of that is a massive restriction. Same deal. If I throw big cams in the motor, it might pick up a little power down low, but it's going to stall out because I can only flow X amount of power through there. This alone on a Neon, stock tune, stock, same throttle body, same everything else, just doing this mod right here, a no 90 lower, is like 15 horsepower. The first time I bolted one of these on personally, whoo, it was a massive difference. Like actual seat of the pants, actual lap time difference, right? With the same stock throttle body, same tune, everything else, just bolted that on, okay? So you're gonna need to figure out where I erased it. Where in your system is the restriction, okay? And that's the part you might need to go onto might need to go onto a forum, might need to go onto a Facebook group or something like that. Now, if you go into these groups, ladies and gentlemen, they have this really cool thing. It's called a search feature. Go ahead and look for that first, and then search Dodge Neon intake restriction, or Dodge Neon horsepower, or insert your car here, horsepower. Don't just go in there and, how I make power. Okay, please search first. This is an SRT4 intake manifold. It is off a Dodge Neon SRT4. So if you have a model-to-model rule, that bad boy's legal. Got to run an adapter plate if you put it on, blah, blah, blah. But that's legal. As you can tell, no 90. This is factory. This one's been ported out a little bit. This is the one I ran. But this is factory setup. Nothing's been welded. Nothing's been changed. Straight in, better manifold design here. Okay. A little bit shorter runners. This was worth, with the same camshafts, with 13.5 to 1 compression versus 12.5 to 1 compression, with a little bit more port work, but switching from a stock ported first gen intake to one of these with a 58 millimeter throttle body, the same on both. I went from 186 wheel horsepower to 209 wheel horsepower. So we managed to tune this setup. That was the initial hit. We managed to tune this setup with, again, the same cams that we had before, slightly more compression, a little bit better header. We got all the way up to 229 corrected wheel horsepower, from 186 to 289, with just a little bit of intake and exhaust restriction work. Okay, same exact camshafts. So, right, a dyno and a data log can also help find restrictions. Absolutely, absolutely, right. So we talked about getting the air into the engine. Okay, on a budget, a ported head should be the last thing you do. Okay, I would rather have mild cams, a good header, a good intake, good throttle body, and a good tune, versus having a really nice, expensive ported head with stock cams, a stock intake, stock exhaust, and not a good tune, right? You got to pick one or the other if you're on a budget, okay? But a ported head is going to give you the intake and exhaust, right? So that one is just one generalization, ported head. And guys and gals, the cylinder head that I have on my motor, well, it's not on there now, it's sitting over there, was CNC ported by a former reputable company. When I got it, mind you, I did go to school for high performance stuff, okay? I put almost 20 hours of port work into that head after it was CNC ported, okay? If you or your buddy sits down with a Dremel, now mind you, that was with actual carbide bits and air die grinders and stuff like that. If you and your buddy sit down with some grinding stones and a Dremel, and you've got 3 to 4 hours into your head, you can absolutely make more power, okay? You can clean up casting flash, you can clean up the bowls, you can make more power, right? But that is not fully ported. So if your buddy put a little bit of Dremel work in it, don't try to sell a head for a whole bunch of money as fully ported, okay? Had that argument with a few people too. My buddy fully ported it. No, he just shined it up, right? You can screw up a head and make less horsepower if you just don't know what you're doing, okay? So we've got it into the cylinder head. We're getting it out of the cylinder head. So let's talk about exhaust for a minute. Do you want a long tube header? So here's our exhaust flange. Your factory manifold is going to come, say, about here. A short tube header is going to come to about here. And a long tube header is going to come somewhere down here. Okay. If you have a tube style exhaust manifold, chances are it's not that bad. It's probably fairly decent. It might be a little undersized, but it's probably pretty decent. It might flow pretty well. Okay. Don't be in a hurry to just throw it all, throw it away. A short tube header into whatever exhaust pipe is going to make more power higher in the RPM range as a generalization. Okay. If it flows better than the stock exhaust manifold, it can help with torque. But the shorter the primaries, generally, the higher in the RPM range, they're going to help. Okay. So if you have a restrictive exhaust manifold and you replace it with a short tube header, a $50 one you bought off eBay, okay, if your exhaust is restricted, it'll make more power. But if you have the right size primaries on a mid-length or a long tube header, you're going to make more power than just a cheap eBay short tube header. Okay. What is the best header to buy? Do you want a tri-Y? Do you want a merge collector, a dump collector? How big a megaphone do you want? What primary size, primary length, stepped, not stepped? That's our advanced horsepower class. We're going to sell tickets for that one in a little bit. But somebody has probably done a dyno session with headers for your car. There's one out there. Tim Coakley did one. I know Ryan Hollister races locally, went down and helped him. They put, I want to say 8 or 10 different headers on. There was a couple that were some surprises. There was almost a 25 horsepower difference in headers alone. And all they were doing is they would run the motor, unbolt a header, bolt the new one on, strap down to the chassis dyno, bolt a new one on, take one off, bolt a different one on, take it off, bolt a different one on. Okay. Like 25 horse and like 30 foot-pounds of torque difference between the best and the worst. Now, some of them were in the top third, and they might have made 2 horsepower more or 3 torque less or whatever. So there was like 4 or 5 of them. I'm doing this off from memory on the test. 4 or 5 of them that were all pretty much equal, right? But there were some that probably wouldn't have done as good as a stock exhaust manifold, okay? So if you see a whole bunch of people running the same header for, your car, and there's a bunch of different options, and the fast guys are running it, the guys that make a lot of horsepower, the guys that have a lot of money into their motors, it's probably a good header. Might be too big for you. Maybe a little different size primaries or something like that. But try to find the information on these tests. I know TPG's done some dyno tests like that. Mark Edens with Edens Tuning right here in the chat. He's done some tests like that. Mark, have you published any of yours? Like, are they out there where we can see them? It's okay if they're not. I get it. Jason Waters, I don't know if he's done an actual, header-to-header combo, but he's ran enough K-series on the dyno. I'll bet that we could get him to tell us what he thinks the best headers for a stock K-series, a mild K-series, and a built K-series is. Okay, because he's done enough dyno runs with different headers, right? A header is almost always, if you don't have a tubular manifold, almost always a decent upgrade. You might pick up 5 horsepower down low, but you might pick up 10, 15, 20 horsepower up top. Okay. So a good header can make a lot of horsepower. I did unequal length versus 4-2. I think I seen that one, Mark. I did see that one. Because that one, whatever header it was, I was like, dude, that thing looks pretty. And then you posted the dyno results, and I was like, oh my god, like it was bad. If I remember that, wasn't the unequal length, it was bad, but it sounded like a Subaru. Delaney wants to make a boom tube exhaust for Chaos. Yeah, I kind of want to make one for this car too. So now Brent's ready. He's ready to hear about the back pressure. Okay. I'm going to write this down. More. We're just going to use BP. Hey, listen, more blood pressure is not good either. More back pressure equals less, and I'm writing this slow so you guys can read it, less horsepower. more back pressure in your exhaust system equals less horsepower. This is not up for debate. There has not been anyone who has the ability to measure back pressure that has ran a dyno test that has increased the back pressure and made more horsepower. And I'm talking Engine Masters. If you guys have seen any of their stuff with Freiberger and Finnegan, David Westenholder, met him out at MPMC, same deal, okay? More back pressure equals less horsepower. Back pressure is the enemy of horsepower every single time. I will plant the flag on this hill and I will defend it to the day I die. So if you want to come to me with a counter argument, you better come with some data, okay? And well, we had dual 3.5-inch on the old 350 Chevy, and we put a single 2-inch on it and made a lot more horsepower. So back pressure equals horsepower. No. Oh, God, no. Nope. Nope. Back pressure, less horsepower, okay? Remember that whole bigger isn't better thing? Bigger isn't better, right? If I have my exhaust, my header, you got to pretend like there's two on the back side of this, come out into a collector, okay? And we'll be generous. We're going to say that this is a 3.5-inch collector, okay? This is some big boy stuff, right? Some big boy stuff. If I take this pipe right here and I neck it down, remember before, the velocity speeds up in here, but if it can't pass through fast enough, it starts building up pressure back here. As you're pushing exhaust gas down here, if my piston pushing up, produces 10 psi, but my header has 5 psi pushing back against it, that means that I only have 5 psi. And this is just some general stuff here. This isn't like a real theory, okay? But my piston and my combustion chamber pressure now has 5 psi less. That's how it happens, okay? That's your back pressure building up. Now, you're going to go, Todd, 3.5 here. We're going to widen her out. We're going to take her out to a 5-inch pipe over here. Okay? 5 inches. Does the neck down. Air can become back pressure. Because what happens is there is a velocity of air coming through here, okay? And as it comes out and it expands out, now mind you, the air, as it comes out of your exhaust port, within roughly 8 to 10 inches is when it's going to be the hottest, depending on the actual amount of burn. If it's done burning by the time it leaves your exhaust manifold or exhaust port, that's the hottest. But a lot of times it'll still have a little bit of burn going on. From here on out, it's cooling down, okay? As it cools down, it wants to slow down, okay? It also shrinks a little bit. So as we expand out into this chamber here, that air is going to come out and it's just going to stall. It's just going to hit a wall because it goes and stops. So we're actually going to build pressure inside this choke point, which will build pressure up on the back side of it, which will feed back up into our exhaust port. If you don't have a good header and a good exhaust system on it, you're going to introduce back pressure. And back pressure is the enemy of horsepower. Okay. What header do I have? I have an old TTI header on my car. It's an 1 5/8 primary. If I have my way, we'll have a little different header. But I have a lot to do on this car, so building my own header. Not necessarily in the cards right now. Now, as Brent said, say I have my collector here, okay? I've got my exhaust pipes that come down into it. And some of you guys are like, yeah, it's not going to expand out here, right? If we just don't run anything after the header. It's almost always been proven. Having some length of pipe coming off to keep that velocity as it's exiting the collector makes more horsepower, and it can be substantial. The theory that I found, okay, and this could be incorrect. This is just the information that I found. This is kind of a general working theory. As it comes out and it just dumps, right? This area right here stalls out because it just and it hits a dead wall of air, okay? Your collector typically isn't long enough either to create another thing that happens in a header. It's called a scavenging pulse, okay? So if I have cylinder 1, cylinder 2, cylinder 3, and cylinder 4, right? When this exhaust valve opens and pushes a wave of exhaust through it, right? It will actually have like the air as it's coming through here, you'll have some molecules spread out a little farther, and then there'll be a wave where they're tighter, okay? As that wave pushes through, it can actually create a small vacuum on the back side of it. So if you take your collector and you have it built properly, as you come through, we'll make this a port, and we'll make this a port, and we'll ignore these in the middle, okay? As that comes down through one, and it has this small vacuum right here, if you can time that correctly, it can create a vacuum going backwards to help draw that pulse out here, okay? But if I am dumping this right here, that vacuum isn't able to build, and I don't get that effect on the next cylinder. So by the air stalling out and losing velocity, I lose that pulse, okay? So an open header is likely not the most horsepower. Well, you see, Todd, modifieds make much horsepower. They got open headers, and they'd probably make more horsepower if they ran a different setup. But it's what they've always done. Sometimes the rules dictate it, okay? Right? Now, mufflers will be a requirement in the near future. Does pointing the exhaust to the ground as opposed to open air make any kind of difference? My ears will appreciate that rule. I was typing that, and now you explain it. Okay. First off, I do want to explain something too, okay? A V8 has a pitch that's around here. It's a little lower, right? A 4-cylinder has a pitch that's about here, right? My 4-cylinder is not different. I'm with this on you guys. This is more pleasing to the ear. This is not. So if this is 130 damn decibels, because it's not loud in my car. It's not loud in my car. Yeah. People don't like this. People that are pointing the exhaust up out the top of the door right at the crowd as you're screaming by at 9,000 RPMs because it's so badass. People don't like it. I don't like it. I love the sound of a nasty 4-cylinder. All motor drag racing where these guys are running insane times, they're making 450 horsepower out of a 4-cylinder naturally aspirated. They're insane, okay? The sound of them is not that pleasant. I love hearing them idle. I don't always like hearing them scream. Most of them point the exhaust up to help with that, okay? A proper muffler will not cost you horsepower, but it will gain you fans. And it might not make the other drivers want to fight you, Because if I'm sitting in the staging lanes and you pull up and you've got that thing pointed right at my head and you've got it riched up at idle because you don't know what you're doing and it's just blowing fumes at me the whole time and I can't pull forward and I can't pull backwards and you won't shut it off because you just like the way it sounds, I might want to fight you. My old car, the exhaust exited out the door. It did not, it pointed up a little bit, just the way that it was built. But I knew that if I pulled up next to somebody and I am sitting with my exhaust pointed at their door, I would shut the thing off. Okay. Now mine did not exit through the passenger door. Oh, I've been talking too much. Okay. Mine exited out the quarter panel. I had a muffler. I had a Thrush Cherry Bomb. Okay. It kills about 12 to 15 decibels. I had 2.5-inch pipe, 2.5-inch Cherry Bomb, and it was still straight through. It cost no horsepower. Okay. None. But it sounded so much better. Okay. Put a muffler on it. For the love of God, don't be that guy. Put a muffler on it. Okay. Now, the question was asked, does pointing the exhaust to the ground as opposed to the open air make any kind of difference? Well, it can. Okay. But in general, it probably won't. Mark commented on it as he said, mandrel bent stuff. So if your exhaust comes back and, okay, also, one thing. If you have an exhaust under your car, and you have a gas tank, okay, especially a plastic one, make sure that the pipey thing with really super hot air in it is not pointed at the thing that melts easily and is full of flammable stuff, okay? Seen a lot of gas tanks melted. Also, even if you don't melt through it, you start boiling the fuel that's in here, and you can build up pressure inside of your fuel tank, and you can cause issues of it not running right. Because now you're supplying your pump with pressure, you're overfeeding your injectors, you can cause it to run poorly, okay? So don't point the hot thing at the thing that's a tiny bomb, okay? It sounds simple. It sounds like something I shouldn't have to say, but every year, and hey, throw it in there in the comments, which hit the like button for me if you haven't already. Throw it in the comments. How many people do you know have melted a fuel tank? Just is there anybody watching right now who has not known somebody who's melted a fuel tank? Now, I'll be honest with you. I have melted a fuel tank. The reason I melted a fuel tank is because my exhaust would come out the back of the car, down the tunnel, and it would turn and it would exit out the side of the car. We actually use stock pipe for this. The problem is that it broke right there. And the fuel tank kind of was like here in a neon, and it broke. So I've melted one. Okay, it leaked. Matt Davis had a car catch on fire. I've seen one fall out. Yeah, we're going to talk about fuel cells and skid plates and all that later. But mine was not pointed; it was pointed out the side, but the pipe broke, and we melted it. Okay, I've done that. So I can raise my hand. I've done it. Right? Not on purpose, but I've done it. Performer who left the fuel cap off and the exhaust was pointing right at the fuel cell. Oh yeah, that sounds like a bad time. Bad time. What's up, Ron? Mr. VCTS feature winner, Ron. Hey, Ron. I did see you send me a message. I seen you was trying to talk a little bit, getting you a big check. You're lucky because I have a purple jacket in my van I'd like to show you. It's pretty cool. Keeps me warm when it's a little chilly out. I've got a few of them to choose from. So have fun with your big check. Maybe I'll wear my jacket down to check it out sometime. Ron just won the first VCTS feature down at Winchester. I like you, Ron. You're okay. You're okay. But my dad's gonna get your feelings hurt. Just saying, because I'll talk crap back. All right. If you're running your exhaust, we're looking at it from the side. Okay. Mandrel bent pipe. So if you have a smooth bent pipe, that looks like this, that air doesn't want to make that corner. It's going to kind of go this way, right? But that smooth diameter helps it flow better, right? Mandrel bent pipe. I'm not going to draw this well, but you guys are going to know what I'm talking about if it doesn't make sense yet. Mandrel bent pipe, it makes that curve, but it kinks it. So it actually like kinks the pipe as it bends, right? I know you guys know what I'm talking about if you've ever seen it, okay? But this will cause a restriction because as that air comes and it wants to make that corner, it's going to be hitting all of these and it's going to make turbulence. That turbulence takes and makes the actual flow smaller, okay? So if you're running a turn down, which, you know, you'd cut it about here, that air is still hitting there. It's still causing a backup. It's still causing some back pressure, okay? So mandrel bent, which mandrel bent in your anywhere in your exhaust system is going to be a problem, okay? But a turn down like that, it'll cause some power loss. If you have just a straight exit versus, because your turn down is not 90 degrees. Most turn downs are like 45 degrees. And if you look at the side of it, if you actually look at a turn down, the outlet is more oval shaped. It has the same square area or more as your outlet here. That's why it doesn't cause a restriction, okay? Pointing it out the side of the car versus pointing it out of the bottom of the car, kind of personal preference. Some tracks, almost everywhere I race, it has to exit outside of the car. So I run mine out to the pinch weld, out to the side. I had a rule written against my door exit, so I had to run it out the bottom. Okay. Passenger side, driver side, whichever works easier for you. We used to run it out the driver side because we use stock pipe and stock location with stock hangers, and going around the stock tank, it worked out really well. Once we put a fuel cell in and started putting the fuel cells where the fuel tank is, there isn't room to route the exhaust out that side of the car anymore. So now we bring it back to the tunnel and we exit it out the right side of the car. So yeah. And as Mark said, carbon monoxide is no joke. Run it past the driver. Yes. Okay. Carbon monoxide, what? You won't realize that you're being carbon monoxide poisoned. Okay. You really won't. And that's the problem. If you have the underside of your car and your header just dumps here, okay? So here's your pipe coming in, your header just dumps. All those fumes are under your car. Yeah, as you're racing, you know, you've got your air rushing by. It'll help pull it away. But you still have a layer of just exhaust gas under the car. If your car is not sealed off, you've got a layer of CO2 coming up into the car, okay? Pace laps, red flags, anything like that. If you're sitting here, say this is your butt, you know, and you got your leg, you got your feet up here, okay? If you've got a buildup of gas under here, just coming up right into you. But if you have a pipe that takes it back here and it exits back here, your area is not going to have a bunch of carbon monoxide underneath it, okay? Running a little bit of pipe, running a muffler will not cost you horsepower. Could cost you a race if you get carbon monoxide poisoning. It might get you somebody trying to fight you, especially this year, if it's, you know, right in their ear. And you're not going to make fans of casual race fans. They're not going to like the four cylinders. They're not going to like you. I race against a guy, and I tell him, I tell him to his face, his car is the worst sounding car I've ever heard. It is way too loud, and the tone of it is terrible. I hate it. I haven't met anybody else that likes it. He did it for a reason. He hasn't changed it. It's his car, right? But I've told him to his face multiple times, I hate his exhaust. I really do. So, yeah. How much speed did that door exit get you? Did you stop winning? No, we didn't stop winning. Almost all the rules that have ever been written against me didn't slow us down. So, but hey, if you don't get a rule written against you from time to time, you're not innovating. I'll stand on that hill too. If you claim you're doing some cutting edge stuff, if you're an innovator and you've never had a rule written against you, you ain't really innovating too far, okay? Or you've never been caught. I'll give you that one, right? 91. Mark? I'm missing something. The comment section there, I don't know what you mean by 91. Or you're replying to a comment that I can't see. And Andre and Travis, thanks for tuning in on the YouTubes. Appreciate it, okay? So get a good header. Run some pipe out the end, okay? Put a cherry bomb on it. Listen, 2.5-inch pipe is probably adequate. 3-inch, really big. You probably don't need 3-inch. If you've got a stock head or stock compression, you do not need a 3-inch pipe, okay? You really don't. That's the basics of air. We're going to talk about fuel, and fuel's kind of easy. Oh, yeah. Mark, am I wrong that it is not, it sounds terrible. It's stupid loud. Like, and I've told him, great guy. I like the guy. I don't like the exhaust. Right? We're talking about fuel. This one is kind of simple. It's kind of simple. Fuel equals horsepower. Oh, wait a minute. Fuel does not equal horsepower. What do I mean by that? More fuel does not equal horsepower. Okay? More fuel does not equal horsepower. There is a specific requirement of fuel that your car needs. I don't know what it is. You might not know what it is, but there is a specific requirement. Okay? If you go past that, the only thing you're doing is spending more money on fuel, washing the oil out of your cylinders, tearing up those nice fancy, Total Seal piston rings. Shout out to Lake. Okay. Causing premature wear, making a bunch of bad smells, and that's it. You're probably losing power. Now, there is a window to your fuel. There's a range from here to here. Okay. And Mark, Mr. Edens, okay. Oh, we're going to talk about the type of fuel. Don't worry. But Mr. Eden, as a tuner, air-fuel ratio. We're going to go on a generality here. What would be our acceptable range for air-fuel ratio? I personally, this is my thoughts. Correct me if I'm way out of line here. About 12.7 to 13.1. This is what I tried to aim for. 12.5, 11.5. Okay, there you go. So there, right? This is a little leaner. This is a little dangerous. Mr. Edens tunes a lot of Hondas. Did you tune Ron's, Mark? This range right here is what's known as your air-fuel ratio. AFR. Air-fuel ratio. If you can get X amount of air and Y amounts of fuel, it's going to equal max power. Okay? Somewhere in this range-ish. And your tuner might have you a little more, Might have you a little less. This is going to change depending on the type of fuel you're running, E85, nitromethane, pump gas, okay? Your tuner is where you're going to go for your actual numbers, but this range is what you want. The higher the number, the leaner it is. So you have more air than fuel, the higher that number is, okay? But this is a very, very, very proven recipe. You only need X amount of fuel for X amount of air. If you have stock cams in a stock head, okay? I'm going to go out on a limb here and I'm going to make a generalization. If you have stock cams in a stock head with stock compression, unless you've switched to E85 and you've tuned it properly, you don't need bigger injectors. Okay? I know a ton of Neon guys. They come stock with 19-pound injectors. The first thing they do, usually about the third thing, they'll throw an air filter on it, they'll throw a cheap header on it, and then they'll throw some like 30-pound injectors in it. Quick lesson. Your fuel pressure, 43.5 is what most fuel injectors are rated at. Okay? You have your fuel injector. Here's your plug for it, right? Here's your outlet, here's your inlet. There is a orifice in here of a certain size. And it will block off that orifice or open it to allow fuel to pass from the inlet to the outlet. Okay? So if you have 43.5 PSI of fuel here, and I open that up and it lets fuel out, okay? The way that it calculates is how long that is open for. Milliseconds, okay? Or duty cycle. Okay? So, if my computer knows that I'm going to be at 12.5 air fuel, if I open this up to say 10 milliseconds, okay, or 80% duty cycle, we're not going to get into all of this. We'll do an advanced deeper dive into what all of this means, how, why, what, okay? But if it opens it for 10 milliseconds at wide open throttle as I'm making power, which is 80% duty cycle, and the math that it has to get this tells it that it has 43.5 pressure with 19-pound injectors, and it's opening them at 10 milliseconds. Now, the 19-pound injectors, you might see a CC. You might have like a 230 CC. That's cubic centimeters per minute. 19 pounds per hour is the pound weight of fuel per hour. It's stupid. Americans will use anything except for the metric system, okay? But that is how much this injector, wide open, 100% duty cycle, never closing, that's how much fuel can flow through it at that pressure. So by opening it for 10 milliseconds, it knows it has X amount, we get 12.5, okay? If I change this number, these are the same number. This is just two different ways to read it. If I change any one of those three, I change this. Okay? If I increase fuel pressure and leave these the same, I'm putting more fuel out the outlet. If I decrease it, I am giving it less fuel. Okay? If I keep the pressure the same, but I open it longer, I give it more fuel. If I open it less, I give it less fuel. If I keep the pressure and the amount that it opens the same, and I change the size of my injector from a 19-pound to say 30, the hole that it flows through is bigger. So I have that pressure and it opens for that long. And it thinks it's injecting this amount of fuel. But it's not. Your computers are dumb. even tuning computers. You know, your air. Well, I got a O2 sensor. It adjusts. Almost all of them. Correct me, Mark. You can speak for the Honda stuff. Okay, a Dodge Neon, the factory PCM. When you go wide open throttle, it ignores the O2 sensor because it cannot react fast enough. Okay, it ignores it. It says it has a table, right, like this, that has RPM over here, and oh god, my mind just went blank. RPM and like map sensor, okay? Because your maps or mass airflow, because this is telling it how much air is coming in. This is telling it the RPM that it's at. So inside each one of these little blocks is the amount of time that injector needs to be open. So, you know, low RPM, you know, a lower map where you don't have air coming in, throttle closed, you're going to need like 1%. But this area up here, where you have a ton of air coming in, your wide open throttle, your high RPM, you're going to need 80% in all of these squares, okay? It just refers to this table. It just looks there and it goes, I'm at this RPM, this throttle position with this map sensor reading, give it this fuel. That's all it does. So if I change these numbers, you're changing your air fuel. Okay? No one runs closed loop under load on the track. I assume so. Okay? And TPS, RPM, map, it depends on the computer because it can calculate all of them. Okay? That's VE for you, is map versus RPM, volumetric efficiency. Again, that's the advanced stuff. I'm a little hazy on VE. I know what it is. I know how it works. I just like the actual explanation of it. I've never had to worry about it that much. I got a guy. He tunes my stuff, right? Pretty good at it. But if I have a stock motor and it requires X amount of air and fuel because it's all stock, and the computer knows that this is stock, this is stock, and this is stock, it's going to give me X amount of fuel. If you just throw 30-pound injectors in it, you have just dumped almost a third more fuel in it. Your air fuel isn't going to be 12.5. It's probably going to be down here and it's going to go 10.0, or your gauge is just going to go dirt, dirt, dirt because it's below 10. Okay? So, if you have stock head, stock compression, stock cams, short of a turbocharger or a supercharger or nitrous, you can't put enough air into that engine, speaking in generalities, to outflow the injectors. I've ran engines that we've built with ported heads, Crane 18s, long tube headers, ported stock manifolds, 55, 58 millimeter throttle bodies, with a custom tuned computer for us, okay, on stock injectors. Made roughly 170 wheel horsepower out of a Neon that's 150 crank. Stock injectors. It wasn't until we started really pushing the envelope that we needed bigger injectors. Okay. Most people do not need bigger injectors. Now, the way to get around that is if you change this. Because if I swap in this big injector, but I tell the computer that in these squares, I need 7 milliseconds or 50% duty cycle, now I have X amount of air or X amount of fuel. I keep my ratio. If I tune the computer for that size injector so that it doesn't open as long, we still can get the same amount of fuel. Okay? That's why dyno tuning, can be important. There's a lot of stuff up here. Okay? Now, I know that some of you are going to ask, maybe not out loud, Todd, what do you run for injectors? Well, fun fact. Went to the dyno one time with some 24-pound injectors, and we maxed them out. So we got some 27-pound injectors. we were running about 85% duty cycle. Pretty decent. Remember how I said we put 229 to the wheels? Yeah, we outflowed those 27-pound injectors. I now have, which those were roughly 200 and I want to think 40 cc injectors, 250 maybe, even we'll say 300. Okay, you could do the math, calculators out there. I now have 535 cc injectors. They're like 42-pound injectors. And you're like, damn, Todd, that's a lot. It is. They're factory turbo PT Cruiser or SRT4 injectors. The car was strapped to the dyno and it was not responding to tuning. And that's when my tuner looked and he goes, how big of an injector you got? And I'm like, 27-pound, man, that probably ought to be big enough. And he's like, nope. He goes, I actually looked at it. He's like, I kept hitting the up button and it wasn't responding. And we're at 120% duty cycle. And I don't know if you guys know this or not, but if you have 100% of something, and that something is the amount of time that a hole stays open, 120% isn't freaking possible. You're just trying to get it to never close, okay? And because we can only flow so much fuel through that hole, it runs lean. So I flew to a U-pull junkyard and pulled out 3 sets of injectors because there was 3 turbo cruisers there and they were really easy to get the injectors out. We came back, threw them on Tyler over at Force Engineering. He's my tuner. Threw him on his little fuel injector machine. Found 4 of them that were evenly matched, and we tossed them in. He went through and he started on the laptop and was able to narrow it in. Now, for a long time, we've ran 50 PSI of fuel pressure because a stock Neon is 49. 50 is just easier, okay? I now run 40 PSI. And instead of having roughly 120% duty cycle, I think now we're at like 45%, maybe. I have way more injectors than I need, but it runs good. We make sure they keep cleaned out. You can go too big on the injector, getting it tuned, as Mark has probably experienced. You don't need some 180-pound injectors where 30 pounds will do, right? There can be some problems with making it idle and stuff like that. These injectors are not that big that they can't idle, they can't be made to tune. But we made some concessions. We run them at a little less PSI, and they're just not open as much. Now, this next year, we're going to have bigger cams. I'm going to be running a better intake manifold. I'd like to get a better header at some point. I'm going to have a little bit more power. I'm going to need a little bit more injector. We're going to try to put the car on E85. All of that still fits with the injectors that I have. Why does E85 matter? And we will address this really quick because this is also one that fits under the fuel, because a lot of guys goes, oh, I just did an E85 conversion. And you go, what'd you do? And they go, well, we threw some bigger injectors in it. Alcohol, air fuel is different, blah, 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 blah. E85 has roughly, we're speaking in generalities, 70% of the British thermal units, BTUs, of energy available as gasoline, okay? So you need to put roughly 30% more of it in to make the same heat, okay? So you have to inject a bunch more of it. It's not as simple as saying, I need 30% more, I put 30% bigger injectors in it, so it'll run great. I've never met anybody that's done that can show me an air fuel gauge that runs properly or a car that runs properly. I've yet to see it, okay? Some guys will do that and they'll start fine tuning with their fuel pressure and they can get it close, but there's other benefits to E85 as far as spark timing and stuff goes, okay? So you need more injector, you need more fuel system, and you need to tune for E85, right? If they're good quality, idle is fine. I've had 2200 in a stock motor with a mild turbo setup. The injectors now are a lot better. That's definitely an older school thing, but yeah. I also do love watching wherever I see the Hondas that make some real smoke that have like 8, 12, 16 injectors. Yeah. Now this is another one too. Race fuel equals race car. Oh, wait. Yeah. Race fuel does not equal race car. Race car does not equal race fuel. Okay. Leaded 110 octane, which is what you buy at the track. Most racetracks have 110 octane fuel. Most pump gas, 87, 89, 91, 92, 93, depends on the station you go to. Turbo Blue, 100, 105, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Octane is the measure of resistance to self-ignition or pre-ignition or detonation. It's harder to make it self-ignite. That's what octane means. When you have your combustion chamber, here's your valves, combustion chamber, okay, cylinder. As your piston comes up here into the head, right? Squishes it in. There's your piston ring, or okay. As that squishes up there, that heats up. That's how diesels actually ignite. They squeeze hard enough that it ignites, okay? That makes a ton of heat. If you have some hot spots in there, they can cause that air-fuel mixture literally to ignite before the spark plug tells it to. The problem with that is if you look at it from above, if this is our cylinder, okay? If our spark plug is here, and we have, if our spark plug is here, yes, I know, okay? That's why we changed it. And it ignites the air fuel here, the flames are going to travel out this way because while it might seem like an explosion, it is a very fast controlled burn, but they work their way out. If I have a hot spot over here against this, if it self-ignites, it sends its own waves out. Where these waves hit is what causes detonation. That will destroy your head and destroy your piston quick. Okay? Quick. If you have stock compression, you can more than likely get by on mid-grade to premium. I usually recommend premium because the jump from, 87 to 91, not that big a deal. And honestly, a lot of premium fuel does not have as much ethanol in it. Some of it will, some of it doesn't, okay? And we'll do a fuel one here soon too of actual E85 and ethanol and fuel and methanol and alcohol and nitromethane. We'll talk about that too. Okay. We'll do another show on that too. This range, not that big a deal. But to go from 91 all the way over to 110 leaded, that's a big jump. Okay. Now, it's harder to self-ignite, which means it's also harder just to ignite. You can actually lose horsepower on a higher octane because if your spark system isn't quite up to spec, right, it might not be able to actually ignite the 110 properly. So it won't make as much power. Most people could actually get by with 87 octane fuel. 91, a little bit of a safety net. Okay. If you mix 110 and 91, yeah, you get somewhere in between there, right? But you more than likely don't need to. I run 110. Why do I run 110? Well, I have a set of 13.5 to 1 pistons. And then I have, I forget the exact number, but I had minus O dot X shaved off the head. And I had 0.010 shaved off the block, somewhere in there. And so this little area up in here got smaller, and I was ramming a piston up in there, and we ended up somewhere in the 14.0 to 14.2 compression ratio. That's a lot. 9.6 is the factory dual overhead cam Dodge Neon compression ratio. That's a lot of compression. I run 110. When we were running 10.5 pistons, that's a 10.5 to 1 Wiseco piston on an Eagle rod. Okay. When we were running 10.5s, I ran 91. Car made great power. This is like $9 a gallon. That is like $3 a gallon. Now, why am I going to switch to E85? Okay. Because E85 is generally roughly 100 octane. There's more qualities to it. We'll talk about E85 there. But I live over here in Charlotte. Over in Lake Odessa is this place that makes ethanol, and you can go to their pump and they guarantee the ethanol content in there. It is as fresh as you can get it, and it's roughly $2.50 a gallon. So instead of paying $9 a gallon, which 9 was last year, so it's probably like 10 or 11. So I'm saving $6.50 a gallon, and I burn 4 to 5 gallons a night. So 7 times 4, 7 times 5, times however many race nights. I have to have the car tuned anyway. I'm building the fuel system anyway. So building it and setting it up and tuning it for E85 is going to cost me pennies, but we're going to be able to save $30, $40 plus a night. So yeah, that's why. Make sure your fuel pressure is correct. Do not put bigger injectors in unless you tune for them. Okay. Run factory fuel pressure. Make sure your fuel's not restricted, filters and all of that. Make sure your fuel injectors are not restricted. Clean them out. Pull them out. Make sure there's not a bunch of crud in the top filter. There's a little filter in the top of them. Hit it with some brake clean. Clean it out. Make sure your fuel system can flow adequately. You make horsepower. If you understand air-fuel ratio, if you understand VE or alpha N, or I'm tired, I can't remember all the others. There's multiple ways to actually tune the car. If you understand all of that and you can actually tune your car, mess with fuel pressure, mess with fuel injectors, tune your car to it. If you don't have an air fuel ratio gauge, which I recommend even if you have a bone stock setup, because it can help you, it can really help you out. Okay. Because if you have a problem, the car starts running funny, you can look at your air fuel gauge and see that it's pegged lean and go, oh crap, might tear the motor up. Or you can see your air fuel ratios are still good and know that you're probably not going to tear the motor up if you try to drive through the mist a little bit. Okay. So yeah. How much extra weight is that going to mean you have to carry for a 100-lap race at Olga's? So because they split it in 2 50-lap races, I have an 8-gallon fuel cell. A typical 50-lap feature for me on 110 was about 3 gallons. So I estimate that I'll probably use 5 to 6 gallons for a 50-lap race on E85. So I'll just have to refill the cell up at the halfway point. So yeah. The other thing is that if I am worried about that, if I'm racing it and I find that I do have that issue, I am probably going to try to tune the car on race gas as well, so that I'll have a 110 tune and an E85 tune. I'd like to be able to do that in the name of science, to be able to show you guys, we tuned the car on 110, we maxed it out, we switched it over to E85, here's the power that we made, and be able to show that difference. I'd like to be able to do that. So in that case, if it's like, oh man, I'm burning 7 gallons of fuel to run 35 laps, you know, yeah, I'll probably throw a race gas tune up in it to head out to California. So yeah, The only thing to look for on E85 maintenance and keep up is more. And also got to make sure the track you're going to allow Z85 doesn't require different extinguishers to put out correctly. Yes. We are going to do a show on E85 in the next few weeks because that is another big question that's been coming up a lot because fuel costs are so high, right? E85 does require more maintenance. You've got to drain it if you're going to let it sit out. It will attract water. You've got to check the actual ethanol content on it. You've got to make sure your fuel lines are up to spec. Your pump, your filter, your injectors can all handle E85. There's a lot. There's a lot to it that can actually come into it. So it is going to require more maintenance for sure. E85 is not an easy, quick swap. The other thing too is if you tune it for 85% and you get 75% ethanol, your tune's messed up. So keeping on track of the actual ethanol content is another big one too. So, and yeah, as Mark says, one thing to remember on air fuel is that it is an average across all 4 cylinders. If you have a miss and it goes slightly lean, you might have a weak injector and can kill a piston. Yes. And that's also why I recommend the air fuel as a recommended gauge. Because if your car always runs at 11.8 or 12.1 or 12.4 or whatever you have it tuned for, whatever it's from the factory, if you have one cylinder that starts running rich or lean by half a point to a point, your air fuel will change because it's getting it leaned out a little or richened up a little. And if it really goes lean, your air fuel is going to change. And that's why I recommend that gauge is, hey, the car just feels down on power. Look at the gauge. Oh, crap, I'm running 10.0. I've got something dumping fuel in. Oh, crap, I'm running 14.3. I'm leaning it way out. That, you can detect a fuel problem with an air fuel gauge pretty quick if you're paying attention. Because it could be, your fuel pump, your fuel pressure regulator, there's a myriad of things it could be, but you have an issue in the fuel system. So, yeah. It was a lot, an hour and a half. I think we covered some quick stuff. Nobody tried to fight me for the back pressure stuff. I think at this point in time, I've been yelling that for like 4 years. So I think the people that hate me for it just have unliked the page and don't watch anymore. Blocked me. That's happened at least once before. So, but we are going to attempt to go live Thursday as well. I'm trying to shoot for about 8 o'clock, if not before. I'm going to try it at my camera. We might try to do this from my house. I'm going to take everything home. So if I do it from my house, we can do it a lot quicker. We are going to try to have a guest Thursday. We're trying to do a show Thursday. Mark says, I'll offer up the dyno for back pressure testing. I'll get with you, Mark. Yeah, we'll figure something out because I've got a lot of stuff that I want to test. I've got a guy local that has an engine dyno that I want to use too and stuff like that. So yeah, but I'll get with you, Mark. We'll definitely talk. So because if nothing else, if there's anybody local that's running a test or something too that we can run an exhaust test on, you're not that far from me. I can make the drive. So have to be on a weekend. But anyways, that's what I got. I don't see any more questions or anything like that. If I said something that's wrong, throw it out there. I like being correct. I don't have to be right. I just like to be correct. So I will happily admit mistakes. I am running on low sleep. So I might have swung and missed on a couple things, but a lot of this was just talking in generalities tonight, nothing too specific. So I appreciate that, Chris. Chris says, you helped me a bunch. Thank you for your knowledge and great explanation of what you're trying to teach. I really do appreciate that, Chris. I really try hard. I do. I've gotten pretty good at it over the last few years. I try to cover the basic stuff for guys that don't know, and I try to cover the advanced stuff for people that do. And a lot of times, the guys that were basic are now watching the advanced stuff. So it really makes me happy to be able to help and to be able to teach guys and gals and share my knowledge. So I do appreciate that. But thank you all for being here. If you have not already, hit the like button. Those of you that are in here that are subscribers, I'll probably pop into the group. We'll go live for a couple minutes. It is very late, so I understand that. But we'll pop into the group and be there for a minute. And yeah, thank you all for being here. I, again, can't tell you how much I appreciate it. We'll catch you on Thursday.